So we're talking about how self-defense and martial arts is not necessarily the same thing, and that martial arts don't always include certain elements which are very important for self-defense. And since you've experienced a lot of self-defense situations, what's the breakdown of what a person needs to know?
So when it comes to self-defense, there's like multiple factors you have to take into consideration. Because of the previous video and the comments and everything else, I just wanted to cover all the bases for us, because it seems like people were either a bit naive or we were thinking that we didn't consider some stuff. I just want to make sure that the information is out there, and we do think about a lot of things when discussing Aikido and self-defense. Like you mentioned before, martial arts can help you a lot when defending yourself, but there are some things that you have to consider. There are a lot of things, to be honest, and I took them all and tried to put them into certain categories. So the first one that I did was environmental factors that you have to consider. So from my personal experience, and because I was working for so long, in the security industry in some areas that they're not very safe for people, and myself especially, there are a lot of environmental factors that you might not think about, but you do have to consider. They're not in order or anything. Possibly I missed some out because I wanted to keep that as precise as possible. So the first one is lighting. You have to really consider that. Because of my personal experience, because I got dropped once because I didn't see the punch, to me it became very important. And especially working in different environments like nightclubs, bars, where there might be different lighting inside. It's all well and nice when it's daytime and you can see the opponent or a person that's causing you threat, but when you can't, then it becomes difficult. So I was working in a nightclub, let's say, and we always have different lights on and so on, and usually a nightclub has a lot of different lights and it's quite dark. Difficult as it is to see people, but when you have strobe light, they break in the movement, so you don't really see every second of the person's movement. You have to kind of guess where the person is going to be. You kind of have to guess the movement that he's going to make, and it can impair and change your depth perception. Like bad lighting in general, it actually changes the depth perception. You can't see punches. It becomes difficult when you have to time stuff. It hides physical objects as well.
Yeah.
So when I was working in nightclubs, I tend to guess most of the time, because you will see fights and you almost see where the fights would be happening, but everything would change so quickly, and because of strobe lights and bad lighting, you wouldn't necessarily see where the people are and everyone else is, or where the threat, which way the threat is coming. So you have to make sure you can see your surroundings, like you can at least anticipate where they are, and you have to judge by the lighting, what you can achieve. The other one was surface. I found that surface area is one of the main considerations when you're trying to avoid a threat, because obviously small spaces is difficult to move. It depends on the surface, if it's slippery or not. It's cold in winter, so we have to consider how slippery it is, how uneven it is. So the changes in levels, stairs make a big problem. Sometimes you have special platforms and then it becomes difficult to react, especially in poor lighting. I used to hate that. I used to have different platforms and people would be fighting or throwing bottles and anything else. You can't really see it and you would get caught. So the legs would be bruised and you fall over and stuff. So you have to be aware of that as well. Also the hardness of the flooring. Someone mentioned the concrete, and obviously you're not gonna do a double takedown, on a concrete floor. Possibly you're gonna mess up your knees, or you can actually kill a person as well if you perform any kind of skill or action. The surface where you stand on is very important, because that's the only thing that's keeping you stable, right? So you have to consider that. Also put objects in. I classify them as light objects and the objects that are heavy and basically unmovable. The light objects include everything that you can pick up, essentially, and that's a potential weapon. You have to consider that. If you're on a bar on a street, whatever you are, bottles, lamps, glasses, chairs, everything. That's a potential weapon, and you have to be aware of it. Also, you can obstruct your movement as well. So you're still working about, and there's loads of chairs and tables, and people eating food, and it's difficult to react sometimes and move around it, and it impairs your reaction time as well sometimes, because you're thinking about possibilities of you getting someone else hurt. When it comes to the objects that can be moved, so barriers, lampposts, walls and everything else, it's super important, because you can't change the environment. You can't move it in any way, and if you're fighting multiple opponents, or even one opponent backed in a corner, it becomes very difficult. I know it's difficult to react when the threat comes and you haven't anticipated it, but from my personal experience, I always look around. If I go to an area that's not, I wouldn't say, safe, even if it's safe as well, I would say you would always have to be aware of your environment. The exits, the corners where possibly there are no cameras and stuff, and where you can't move well, you have to consider that. Also, temperature is one of the things that I found that can affect the way you deal with the threat. So in cold temperatures, usually restricts your movement. If you're not ready, if you're cold, your reaction time is usually a bit delayed. For athletic performance, it's actually better than hot weather. But when it comes to just self-defense, I think it can impair the way you act in that situation. And because I came from a country that has minus 25 in winter time, and it's quite challenging, I must say. From my experience, it's very challenging fighting in the cold, purely because it's just, even punching someone actually hurts. So it's very situational. When it comes to temperature that's high, the only issue that I found was sweating. It just changes the way you deal with the opponent and yourself as well. You become slippery. All of these things, they can work for your advantage or disadvantages, but mainly the heat is usually, at least to me personally, was a massive disadvantage, unless they had like decent amount of clothing, because clothing kind of mitigates, the sweating. But usually when it's hot, people are just wearing t-shirts, and the quality is not that good, so they usually rip, and it's even bigger mess. So you also have to consider other weather conditions like wind, rain, snow, and it mostly affects vision. Where I came from, heavy snow and heavy rain, it's a pain in the ass to deal with. Usually you don't have much time to react anyway, and then when your vision is impaired, it's horrible. So you have to think about that as well. How well are you going to react to some external stimulus? You might see it, but in delayed time because of weather condition. Number of people around you. I found that's one of the things that I had to deal with during my years in security, was, working with a lot of people, thousands of people in one place. When dealing with someone who's aggressive towards someone else or me, myself, you have to be aware of people around you. And the most important bit is realizing that you might be dealing with one threat, but if you do something that public perceive as unnecessary, which is often that, because usually they see just half of the picture, you might be dealing with much more just one person, and you will get people that would interfere. Also, as an obstruction to your movement, they can obstruct your movement greatly, and it's so annoying, especially when the person is super aggressive and you have to act and you can't, because people are just naive and they're in your way, and you can't help but delay your reaction because of them. I also put on area size and composition. So depending on the room size, the length and everything else, maybe you're working in a basement or you are in a basement. I mean, it's not necessarily with regards to working in that kind of environment, but if you're in a bar somewhere that's located underneath, the ground, think about the stairs. If something happens, you might be able to take the person down, but what's the next step? What if you have to use a lift? Like, how are you going to deal with that? So that's one of the things that I used to consider a lot as well. Exits in general, the sizes of the rooms, the layout, comes in hand with everything else. But that's what you have to observe when you come in place, and you might feel that it's not really friendly, or maybe you feel that it's friendly, but just for safety's sake, if something happens, what would you do? And all of these things I just mentioned environmentally, they could be used for your advantages or disadvantages.